So, Lone Rider here, and I want to talk about the benefits of hunting bows for those of us who don't hunt. All right, and I don't have anything against it. It's just I didn't grow up doing it, so it's not my thing. I mean, might I try it someday? Possibly, but currently I do not. So, one of the things I have noticed though is that the archery field is split. There's modern compound bows, and then there's everything else. But within that everything else, you have what some people consider traditional archery, in the sense of primitive archery. So self bows, long bows, flat bows, etc., carved from one piece of wood. Then you have, I guess, what you could call modern or contemporary traditional archery, which is usually bows like this, or like my takedown recurve, where it is a laminate construction. It does have fiberglass and this, that, there, the next thing. But it also has a simple wooden riser, and usually you're just shooting off a shelf, or if you're using arrows that don't have feathers on them like this, sometimes you have a little plastic rest there instead of a strike plate. But those are the way it breaks down. And for those of us doing, I mean, I do both. I have a homemade longbow, 73 inches long. I have a couple flat bows. I would have made more, except it's time consuming, and getting your hands on the wood is kind of hard. And, I mean, I have 3 homemade bows, and I've been an archer for only about a year, so I guess I'm not doing too bad. But, yeah, my other form of traditional archery, aside from what we could call primitive traditional archery, is the contemporary traditional archery. When I'm not shooting my longbow or my flat bow, I'm shooting either this or my takedown recurve. And I actually like this better than my takedown recurve. Now, I didn't get this new. This is a Browning Safari, and it's probably about as old as I am, maybe older. Browning doesn't make bows anymore. So, and the previous owner had put, you can see the remnants of some paint. I think it was painted in sort of a camouflage pattern. I've been trying to take that off, but I also don't want to ruin the finish. So, there. And I'm shooting off the shelf. You can see I just have a hairy, fuzzy rest there, and then the strike plate. And this is a pretty cool bow, but it has some advantages over my takedown recurve. So, when I say the advantages of hunting bows for those of us who don't hunt, I'm not talking necessarily about compound bows. Compound bow is a compound bow is a compound bow. But I'm talking specifically about recurves, so-called contemporary or modern traditional archery, that in many cases may have originally been designed as either general purpose bows, so entry-level target shooting, but not necessarily Olympic style at 70 meters, and or field archery such as 3D targets, things like that, just general target shooting informally, and some for hunting. And in many cases, your entry-level takedown bow will be that sort of bow. But it will have differences to something like this. First of all, because it's a takedown bow, the riser is bulkier where it joins the limbs. There's a bolt or some kind of other attachment mechanism. And in general, a takedown bow is going to be heavier and bulkier. This is very light. Next thing you'll notice is length. A takedown bow is usually going to be longer, since it's designed to be taken apart for transport, although most of us don't necessarily do that, but it can be. So the length is not going to be an issue. And since many entry-level takedown bows are designed to fulfill the dual roles of informal target shooting as well as maybe light hunting, they're not going to be as compact as a dedicated hunting bow. Something like this Browning Safari is made as a hunting bow. That's what it's marketed for. And if you're in the woods rather than out in a field somewhere, a bow that's shorter, knock to knock, is going to be more maneuverable, more manageable. This might be especially true if somebody's in a blind or a tree stand. But even if you're just in the bush, in the woods, in the brush, a shorter bow is going to be beneficial in that sense. A shorter bow is also, however, beneficial to uh, those of us who just are all around shooters. And certainly this is a lot lighter. It's a lot more comfortable to handle. It has a certain aesthetic. I know that's not a functional thing, but a one-piece bow like this does have a certain aesthetic that's very pleasing. A little simpler, a little smoother lines compared to the bulky riser of a takedown bow. And then there's the overall length. This is much shorter than my takedown recurve. And one of the areas where that can be an advantage is if you're shooting indoors. The archery range I go to, when it's really, really cold, they do have a room upstairs where you can shoot out to about 20 yards. It's better than nothing. And since I can't get quite that far in my garage, I sometimes go there, even when it's really cold or inclement weather, I'll use the indoor range. Now, the thing about the indoor range is the ceiling isn't that tall. So if I'm standing and I'm shooting and I don't cant the bow, it can hit the ceiling. Now, that's obviously not good for your bow. It's also not very good for the range, right? I mean, you get little pockmarks in the ceiling. Now, the people don't mind, clearly, because there's pockmarks all up and down the shooting line from people who are holding their bows straight up and the ends are nicking the ceiling. But I prefer to avoid it. Now, there's ways you can do that. You can cant the bow. If you're just shooting off a shelf, sometimes you cant the bow slightly to keep the arrow from possibly sliding off. Although you can usually achieve that same effect by just sort of rolling the string in the opposite direction as you pull it back. If you roll the string slightly so that it, in this case, left-handed, the arrow's on this side, so you roll the string this way, it puts pressure that way on the arrow. So you don't have to cant the bow necessarily to keep the arrow from falling off. But obviously, if you're worried about striking the ceiling, then you're shooting like this. And there's nothing wrong with shooting like this, but if you'd rather shoot like this, a shorter bow does away with the risk of hitting the ceiling. It's also just, again, generally more compact in terms of carrying it. Something like this you would carry unstrung because it's an older bow. Your brand new takedown recurve, you could leave strung. It's not a problem. This is 40 years old. I'm not going to leave it strung for obvious reasons. But okay, well, when it's unstrung, it's actually longer. So it becomes all the more of an issue. If you don't have that much space, you want a shorter bow for carrying it. And in general, these handle better, right? If that's the type of thing you're looking for. And like I said, I don't hunt with a bow, but I want a bow that's light, that handles well, that's not going to hit the ceiling, that's just more, I don't know, more the style I'm looking for. And in that case, these bows that are designed as hunting bows, actually, they can make very good all-around traditional archery bows. That's not necessarily what they were designed for. This may have been designed to kill deer, but specifically. But that's not to say you can't use it for something else. And I found that I actually enjoy shooting this a hell of a lot more than I enjoy shooting my store-bought recurve. The irony, of course, is what I paid for this. I mean, I got it off somebody who had it for sale on Craigslist. Now, you can see the finish, the paint. It's not in the greatest of shape, but it's sturdy. It works. And it didn't cost me. It cost me about what you pay to get a pizza, maybe a pizza and a six-pack. That was the price of the bow. So I mean, it was not expensive. And I think I mentioned that when I was talking about used bows. You're looking at like a high-end bow like this. It would set you back $400, $500, $600, $700. But then you're looking at a used one. You can find them a lot cheaper. As long as they're not in good shape, the limbs aren't damaged, that's an option that makes this type of thing much more affordable for people. But the bow itself, the handling characteristics, I actually prefer this type of bow. I like shorter bows. I like bows that are a little more maneuverable. And this, like I said, it's not so much like I'm going to be shooting in the woods, shooting a deer or whatever with it. That's not my thing, but I do like the way it handles. I do prefer the aesthetic. I do like that it's a lot lighter, and the short length rather, I find pretty good. And getting a shorter bow with an entry level takedown recurve is kind of difficult if you're looking for one that has a decent poundage. A lot of times they do make shorter bows, but they're all in kiddie draw weights. So if you're older than 12, getting a shorter takedown bow is not usually an option unless you could find one that's specifically meant for hunting. But if you're going to do that, unless you need the takedown ability, you might as well get something like this, which is going to be a lot lighter, a lot less chunky in the riser, and just has generally all around better handling characteristics and so on and so forth. So, whether or not you hunt, whether you even like the idea or not, and again, I have nothing against it. I'm not saying anything bad about hunters. I'm just saying it's not my thing. But if you're looking for a modern or contemporary traditional archery setup, and you're only looking at target or field archery stuff, you may be missing out. Look at the hunting stuff. There may be stuff there that is going to be more suited to what you need, ironically. So just a thought. And again, I would not normally have thought to look for a bow like this, but when I came across it and tried it out, and I was like, oh my gosh, I really like this kind of bow. And yeah, I mean, it's marketed as a hunting bow, so it wouldn't. Something as simple as doing an internet search, bows for, traditional archery target shooting. This is not going to come up, and nothing like this is going to come up. So it's all the more reason that you sort of broaden your horizons and do some research into bows that, may be designed for a different purpose, may be something that you wouldn't think, well, I need one of those, or I'd want one of those. But the reality is, it may be much more suited to what you are trying to do than you would think. So there is a obvious intended purpose for hunting bows and archery equipment. However, even if you're not a hunter, you can still benefit from their size, compactness, handling characteristics, etc. So check that out. Get your hands on different types of bows. If you go, any good archery store is going to have more than one kind. I mean, some tend to specialize, more in compound, more in recurve. But if you start looking around, try out different things. Don't just be sort of locked into what people are trying to push you towards or recommend, because you may find that, yes, that's designed for hunting, but actually it's more suited to what I need. So, Lone Rider out. Rock on. Stay safe.